Hi, welcome to this week's edition of Blues Talk, where again, John, Dave and myself are going to look back over our defeat against the Aussies last weekend. Look forward to our match against the All Blacks and also Leinster's match against Treviso. And this week we have a special segment where Dave is going to interview Manus Lappin, who's the editor of Emerald Rugby, and we'll show you that shortly. Anyway, boys, looking back at Ireland's defeat against the Aussies, very, very poor display. 4 tries conceded.
Shocking. It was really, really bad. I mean, it's not like it was a brave defeat, one of our moral victories that we used to have. It was just shocking. I mean, we were terrible. There was no area of the pitch that we didn't suck at. I mean, if there were a winner at sucking, we would have won. I mean, it's really hard to kind of sum up the game because we were just rubbish. I mean, we defended poorly. Scrum wasn't great. Our line-out wasn't great. We didn't show anything in attack, anything of any worth. And what's most disappointing is this isn't a great Australian team. I mean, it's, there's been great Australian teams, there's been poor Australian teams. It's neither, but it's a team that we're at least as good as.
Well, I think you're bigging us up there a bit, Dave, now, in fairness. I was very, very disappointed after watching that game. My wife actually turned to me and said, that's the most disappointed I've ever been after a game. And I have to agree with her. Any game, any rugby match. Before the game started, I turned around to the guy beside me and I said, apart from Stephen Ferris and Donncha Ryan, that's the best pack we've got out there. If we can't give them a bit of jip with that pack, we're going to be, I'll be very surprised. And surprised and disappointed I was. The pack was probably... Well, you can't single anyone out. If you say maybe Fergus McFadden had a good game, everyone else was shite.
Yeah, they were just diabolical. And it's really galling because we kind of built ourselves up in a way as supporters to after what we'd seen against Samoa and blah 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 that we'd see something more. But it was just mediocre. I mean, we would have been lucky actually. That does down the good name of mediocre. It was very, very poor. There was no pattern. There was none of the stuff we wanted to see. None of the stuff that even if we'd lost, if it had happened, we'd at least be, we can say, well, we can take this from the game, we can take this from the game. There was none of that.
Well, I thought our biggest weakness was actually in defence, where they just seemed to run soft and they are able to break through us at will. I'd love to see the stats and how many metres that they gained.
That's why I said to you guys actually earlier, before we came on air, about is there a parallel between what we saw on Saturday and what we saw in, say, Game 2 or Game 3 of Schmidt's regime at Leinster.
But the thing is, if you think back to...
I don't think so.
We talk about self-defence, etc.
If you think back to 3 years ago, in Schmidt's early games, he was missing all his stars. Now this team has all the stars in it. As you said, we were only missing a couple of frontliners. That they've played together hundreds of times. I mean, you know what I mean? There must have been half the team at 50 or more caps.
Well, if you look at the first try, Rob, the team were defending. They seem to defend very narrow. When you're sitting in the stadium, you can kind of see how the backs line out, and they didn't seem to. They didn't seem to fill the pitch at all. And Carney, they seem to be bunched up in midfield, and Carney and Bow were actually in front of each other, and your man only had to step one of them, and he stepped both of them. What's he called? Honey Badger.
Nick Cummins.
He just stepped them both together, and they both fell for they both bought the same swerve, both bought the same dummy. Which, I mean, that's for two guys with as many caps as the two of them who have as much talent as Rob Kearney.
But even quite
shocking.
Dave's 23rd rule: self-given nicknames are not really nicknames.
But even Quade Cooper's try, I mean, like, that is a simple thing to defend against. He just ran straight through, and both were left in no man's land.
Yeah, that's the irritating thing. I mean, we how many times have we seen Ian Madigan? We know he's a good defender. How many times have we seen Luke Marshall? We know he's a good defender. One-on-one, they're good defenders.
Yeah.
And it was a one-on-one tackle that either of them could have made, and neither of them did. And that's the irritating thing about it.
You can't underestimate Quade Cooper, though. I mean, he's a bloody good player.
But
it's like a great dummy. He has a great step.
But if he's going to dummy one guy, he's going to run into the other.
But it's like
both of them missed.
It's like as though neither of them knew what they were supposed to do in that situation, and they, You know, and it just didn't happen once, because obviously mistakes can happen during match, but when it happens consistently, then there's obviously a fundamental flaw with the defensive system, and it's not working.
What the point I was going to make earlier was Les Kiss, the defence coach, he's been there 5 years. As far as I know, he invented the soak tackle, which is kind of a soft method of defence, because it's you're not creasing the guy and chopping him down. You're doing the opposite. You're trying to hold him up, and you're actually allowing him to make yards while he's, but the ball will get turned over. So okay, you might be 10 yards back, but you've got the scrum, you've got possession. So it's a bit. Does that translate? Does that have any bearing on the soft approach? It's like we were refusing to commit.
We
wanted to keep our options open until the guy was gone past us.
I think the problem wasn't. Now I have issues with the choke tackle. I think A, as you say, it concedes too much ground, and B, it takes up too many players. So if it doesn't work,
and energy.
Did I say soak tackle?
Yeah, but the choke tackle. If it doesn't work, you're actually boned, because A, you've conceded ground, and now you've conceded an overlap as well.
Yeah.
So I have issues with, but it wouldn't have mattered because we weren't doing it.
Yeah.
We weren't actually getting to the attack. The system, whatever it was, didn't work. Now, whether that's a case of it's early days and it's information has been communicated to players and they're not quite sure how to carry it out on the pitch and that has to be fed back in, etc. I don't know. But I would say that one worrying thing about Schmidt's last year in charge of Leinster was, if you remember the early games last season, we conceded an awful lot of ground in defence. And I'd be worried if that happened again. Now, in fairness, we stopped. But it didn't bode well. I mean, to a certain extent, I don't want to do it, and I'm not going to do it, but you could almost lean towards, is this performance a blip? Because now it's not a blip in the wider scheme of the last, if we say, 18, 20 months of Irish rugby.
Well, I was about to say that, because we've played 19 games since the World Cup. We've won 7. And those matches, those 7 wins are against Samoa, USA, Canada, Wales, Argentina, Scotland and Italy. And we have 2 draws against France. They're not the big boys.
The real powers of world rugby.
People in there
now, you see, that's why I'm asking that question. I mean, but on the other hand, you look at the players in that period of time, all those players, and like one thing we might have said about Kidney, he didn't always pick the informed players, etc., etc., etc. I think we'd agree that Schmidt pretty much did, or at least tried to.
Yeah.
And there were guys who were in form and were playing well and have been playing well for their provinces, and they haven't so far this season put in a performance like that. So these are all the things that have to be addressed. Now, I'm not saying that that's it. I'm not saying that it's a new defensive system. I'm saying there's probably elements of everything combined to complete the complete and circular fuck up we saw.
Well, it's the top 2 inches as well. I mean, whoever is responsible for the mentality, and to some degree it's each individual player, but whoever is overall trying to prime them for that match, they weren't primed. They were.
No. They looked leaden.
They were standing. I think I was saying to you guys earlier, I was watching a particular scrum up near the Australian line in the second half when we still had some chance of doing something in the match, and they were standing around looking at each other, waiting for the scrum to form. They weren't. Normally you'll see guys slapping each other and go, all right, come on, and if people are standing around, there'll be 2 or 3 guys going, come on lads, come on, let's, there was none of that. They were just passively going into the scrum.
But we did bring ourselves back into contention. And there was at one point,
that was Sexton,
true,
mainly.
But he missed a sitter in front of the sticks, right? Now, if he had got that, then there was another opportunity where I think we were within...
Decision to go to the corner.
Well, the question was that anything that we did, or was that a certain amount of issues inherent in the Australian game plan? Because they have conceded an awful lot of penalties. You think back to the Lions. Since then, and through the Rugby Championship, they are a very, very ill-disciplined team.
Well, I thought they
you
were
could
very
argue
cynical.
Could have had a second man in the bin in the first half.
The question is, did we drag ourselves back, or did we just take advantage of opportunities that were presented to us through no particular hard work of our own?
Well, I think for to put pressure on them is what, like that's what the Irish team did, is that they forced Australia into conceding penalties, but the Australians were extremely cynical that they were willing to give away 3 points and not concede 5 or 7.
Well, there's another thing that I haven't really heard mentioned, which is the last time we played Australia, we came out of the traps like mad things and tore them a new one. Sean O'Brien, Stephen Ferris, you know, a famous thing where he picked Will Kenya up and dragged him down the field. We just came out and blitzed them. They weren't expecting it. They were very confident before the game, and one of their commentators famously made some slide remark about how we were just showing up for the anthems and everything else was going to be Australia's.
In fairness to the Aussies, they turned up and went on the lash
they
three days before.
But the point I was going to make was there'll be a bit of a sting from that. I know they went further than us in the World Cup, but because they won't have fancied being beaten by us, and in the manner we did it to them, I'd say they had a little bit of that would have helped with their mentality. They had a little bit of that's the guys that taught us how to play rugby there the last time and really out physicaled us. There's no way they're going to out physical us this time.
Well, if you kick the ball up in the air without having to chase at a former Aussie rules player, what's he going to do except capitalise on it?
He's a league player, really. He's only a year in Aussie rules, but yeah, there you go. The man is an absolute genius, and it was if the ball had a homing device in it that, you know, as soon as it leaves a boot, find Israel Folau and send it to him, because you know, obviously he had a lot to do.
But it's
with
okay
that.
to kick it if everyone knows what they're to do, and they're going to, as you said, as you mentioned the Leinster Munster match before the Heineken. Like any time that Leinster guy got the ball, he was nailed, he was creamed. That's what he should have been happening to him. But he was able to run, he was able to offload, and created an attacking, counter attack.
There's no problem with kicking the ball if you're kicking it properly. The problem is we were kicking it poorly, and we were kicking it poorly, and the chase was poor. Because the kick is only as good as the chase, as they often say in rugby league, and the chase is poor. The kick itself was poor anyway, because we were actually we weren't turning them round. We were putting them pretty much straight into Folau. Folau was fantastic in the air. Didn't have to do that much work in the air. I mean, a lot of the time the balls were just dropping into his breadbasket.
Yeah. And he's a big guy as well. He's shaggy sized at least, I would say. So he's going to win a battle in the air. But you want to do two things with a kick ball. You want to either find some space where it's going to bounce, and that's the crucial thing. If it doesn't bounce, it's a waste of a kick. Because if it goes straight to a guy, no matter where he is on the pitch, he can run. He's got options. Yeah. If it bounces, all bets are off. It's egg shaped. It can go anywhere. Plus, your guys will have time to get up and chase it. So you either want to go very long into space, which will give your guys time to chase, or else you want to go short. So as your guys will get
an opportunity
to contest the ball, or failing that, very high. Put some snow on it, so as by the time it comes down out of the snow, you've got a guy who's willing to cream whoever gets it. We did none of those things. We either kicked long straight to somebody, or we kicked short straight to somebody, or we didn't chase the kick. So it was our kicking was just
diabolical,
and the chase was worse.
Yeah, well, we might as well just draw a line under that game, and because we've got a nice easy one now lined up for Sunday.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've never beaten the All Blacks, but we did come pretty close in Christchurch in June last year, where just because of a poor decision by Nigel Owens and then Dan.
I was about to say he's the ref, and he's the ref again, isn't he?
He is, yeah. But Dan Carter got a drop goal literally in the 80th minute.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we've come close against New Zealand a couple of times in the not exactly distant history either. I mean, there was a tour where was it Neville Furlong was on the wing, got in the corner, they barely beat us. There was the night.
92, was it?
Yeah, I think it was 92. Yeah, there was a night in a very rainy night in Dunedin, where both Rog and Andrew Mertens ended up.
The yellow pig.
The night of the pig. I think they both kicked 23%, which for those two guys as kickers was just extraordinary. Showed you about the ball, but we came close that day as well, and we've come close in the past as well. We've never beaten them.
We would have beaten them had we had modern scoring in 1973.
Yeah, but we did. We would have beaten them had we had robots. And there's a reason for that. There is a reason why we've never beaten them. And people talk about
reasons.
People talk about the All Blacks, they cheat or they get an unfair advantage from the hacker. The reason why we've never beaten the All Blacks is because the All Blacks have consistently been better than us at rugby.
Yeah.
They are very, very, very good rugby players. I was watching the second half of the game against England on Saturday before our match against Australia, and when England went ahead, You just saw New Zealand. They didn't start going around beating their chests or roaring, trying to G themselves up. They just went off and set up phase after phase of multi-phase play and ran over tries. I mean, it was brutal in its simplicity.
I think the best example of that this season was when they played South Africa in
the rugby championship.
Johannesburg, was it? Anyway, but they were awesome. Like the Springboks came at them. They got their noses in front, and as you said, they didn't panic and they just stuck to their game plan. And it reminded me, we were talking about the Aussies match back, and your wife been disappointed. I remember my most as
my wife
ever,
is
John,
never disappointed.
I'd say John's wife is regularly disappointed, but don't worry, it doesn't last for very long. The disappointment, that is.
But going back to the Rugby World Cup in 1991, where we were leading with about 3 minutes to go, and the Aussies had an opportunity to take a drop goal. They didn't. The drop goal would have drawn it, but they didn't. They ran it, and they knew what they were doing, and they knew that if they ran at Ireland, that we'd crack. And we conceded a try under the schoolboy terrace in Lansdowne Road. Yeah.
Well, no, you go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say about the All Blacks is they also have this thing in their head that they don't want to be on the first team that loses to Ireland. I heard a good old footsie on during the week with Keith Wood, and he was talking about his dad, who I didn't realise, Brian Fitzpatrick, who was on the last All Blacks team to lose to Wales in 1953, right? 60 years ago, the last time they lost to Wales. He was slagged about it ever since, and apparently Cliff Morgan was his opposite number that day, and he used to ring him every year and say, "If only you had a bit," and he had to live with that, and he got such a slagging in New Zealand. So basically, the All Blacks have that mentality that they don't want to be on the first team to lose to Ireland, and Ireland have the converse mentality that they've thrown everything at the All Blacks over the years.
Are we psyched out by them? Like, we're not psyched out. We're not psyched out when we played the Springboks.
No,
we're not. Or Australia. Okay, we were hammered by them at the weekend, but we do beat them from time to time.
Yeah.
Similarly with England, similarly with France.
We have beaten those teams. That's the thing. We've had that first win. I mean, in recent years, we've done quite well against those teams. We've never had that first win against New Zealand yet. We haven't had it yet. So you've got a combination of the weight of history. You've got a combination of the fact that they are feckin' good, and you got and then you've got the fact that we're still in a new kind of thing, and you do need that. You need that first win, even if it's a scruffy old referee makes 100 mistakes in our favour kind of thing. Once you get that first win, it makes a huge difference. I mean, you look at England. What did England do when they came up to win the World Cup in 2003? The first thing they had to do was start beating Southern Hemisphere teams pretty much all the times they played them.
But they seem to try and play four big teams every autumn, rather than playing a Fiji and a Samoa and mix.
They beat the All Blacks in New Zealand, in Wellington, in fact, with 13 men. But that doesn't do it for you.
But I mean, it's always spoken about. But a few years ago, when Munster won their first match in France, similarly with Leinster, when we won our first match in France, it was getting over that hurdle. But is there too much emphasis on provincial rugby now? Because it's not really, certainly in the last 2 years, it's not producing the results for the national team, which is its main reason d'etre to be,
Well, it's not, but is that a function? Is that the fault of the provinces? Is it the fault of the national teams? Is it the fault of various?
It's a massive can of worms if
coaches?
We're going to open that one.
Yeah, that's the thing. You see, I mean,
we want more time.
The provinces are actually doing what they're there to do. The provinces are there to provide international players, or provide a bunch of players who are or could be of international standards.
Who were beaten by Italy, beaten by Scotland, beaten by Australia.
But the provinces are doing their job. There's the players. I mean, we were beaten by Italy. We were beaten by Scotland, and it cost the coach's job. That was the regard that losing those games was held in. So the question is how there's no. It's not the coach's fault. No, but it's not the province's fault. It's not to a certain extent. It's not even the players' fault. There's a whole load of things. You have to take a holistic approach. One thing you can say is that the provinces are doing their job in terms of player production. I mean, we're talking about say young players, and there's a good lot of young players around. We're talking about. You can talk about. I mean, we had Ron O'Gara and Peter Stringer for 10 years as our halfbacks. Now, most of the time they played well. Occasionally they played poorly, but there was no choice. There was nobody else. You could have an argument in which you could make a valid point for any one of 3 out halves, any one of 3 scrum halves, and and you're going to make an argument that the fourth guy who's not playing should be in the squad. So Marmion. So there's that's the job been done. I mean, there is okay. There's certainly we're a bit skinny in certain positions, but in terms of actually producing players who are or could be international standard, that job has been done.
Well, as I said, if we're going to go down that road, we'll be here all night discussing whether provincial rugby has gone too far into the territory of international or at the expense of international rugby, and you could say the opposite with Wales, where they're anyway. Let's not go down that road. But meanwhile, back at the All Blacks, another on the mental side of it, another thing to look at is, because what everybody's expecting now is Ireland to come out with the bite and bollock and hit them for 60 minutes and go, play like we used to play against them, basically,
and then lose by 30.
Then lose by whatever we lose by. But if you made a point earlier, I think, Jason, where you were saying about being cool under pressure. To bring up boxing as an analogy, there's always the contest between a fighter and a boxer, and the fighter usually doesn't win. I mean, there are exceptions to that, of course, but somebody who can keep the head cool, do all the jabs and the keep the structure of the thing, and come out will come out on top. And it's the same with rugby. That's the All Blacks. Like, at the end of the day, it is a fight. It's it's guys punching the head off each other in the same way as boxing is, within a set of rules. So it is very physical, and you have to have a base level of physicality, which we didn't have at all last week. But you have to be up there on the physicality. Problem is when you go overboard on the furious anger and did you put the fear of God in someone today? If you go too far down that road, you get a red mist and you don't play the game, and that's where the All Blacks have it, because they've got the physicality, but they've also got the cool heads behind it, where they know what they're doing. They're really well drilled. They can rely on their systems. They have their basics. They just are able to. They can fight you, but they can also outbox practically everybody. And
as a recent,
that's what we have to aim at. That's what we have to.
A recent Irish international said to me once, "It's no good putting the fear of God into anyone. God isn't playing." But that's the point. I mean, it's all very well going around and giving it, the big kind of and beating your chest and giving a good angry face. At the end of the day, that's not going to win you a rugby match. What's going to win you a rugby match is making your tackles, making your passes, taking your opportunities, and snuffing out opportunities for the opposition.
So are we going to see wholesale changes?
No.
Personnel wise, don't think so.
Well, McFadden's out.
I was about to say,
and he was probably our best performer over the last 2 matches.
Definitely. You probably see Dave Kearney come in for McFadden. Then the bench is probably between Luke, Trimble, Henshaw, in the 23 jersey.
You see Murray start?
I'd say
Murray will definitely start, I'd say. And if Sexton doesn't make it, which O'Driscoll might also not make it, he seems to be a little more likely than Sexton. But if Sexton doesn't make it, then what are we going to do? I'd say we'd probably start Paddy Jackson and leave Madigan to come on and
finish them off.
Deliver
the coup de grace.
He'll be cutting the grass, all right. That's a bit.
Well, anyway, at the same time as the All Blacks match, we're playing.
The real fixture.
The real fixture is going to be over in Treviso.
Might be a bit closer, anyway.
Well,
I hope not.
Well, it's going to be our first game in 3 weeks since we beat the Dragons in Newport. And like last season, we did get out of jail with a very well taken drop goal by Sexton, but it was in the last minute to clinch it.
And it was a very strong team as well last year.
Did Drico played in that game?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. The one thing is, bad knowledge, we're hit by international call-ups. Treviso are hit 10 times worse. I mean, I'd say at least 13 of their first choice 15 is gone, and probably most of their bench as well.
They do have a lot of. They do have a few more little NIQs, I suppose you could call them as well, seeing as Italy starts with an I also. They've a few little signings that might, of course they're still decimated. Like they don't have Lottie Dikiri, who hasn't been playing very well. And we may also have Zane Kirshner if he hasn't been selected.
Hasn't been
far.
selected, yeah.
And I think I heard O'Connor saying that if he's not selected this week, we're eving him. So that'll be a great boost. Who will we get back from Ireland? Very few, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Maybe Boss, perhaps, yeah.
Boss would be the only one I'd have any kind of certainty of, because somebody was saying during the week that Carney and Jennings were warming up with the team. In other words, they were the 24th and 25th men in case you're covered in the front row. You're fairly covered in the second row, but you're always going to need a back row.
The thing I'd worry about Boss, just to go back to that, somebody actually made the point on Les Fans, and it was a very good point, that would he be released back, given that if there's an injury in a captain's run or whatever, it's very hard to pull a guy back from Italy. So we might find that very few guys are released.
Ulster have the same problem because they're playing on the Friday, so they can't really risk anyone with the game on the Sunday, But yeah, so if we're not getting Boss back,
Cooney.
I'm happy enough to see Cooney start, but what I'm saying is if we're not getting Boss back, we're unlikely to get anyone else.
We
have 19 players with Ireland.
The only thing is Boss is a speciality, special. The out half position or scrum half position is a specialist position.
Yeah.
So where they might be more wary to release a scrum half, you might get an outside back or maybe a prop, because there are guys in the country who you can call up quickly who are of a similar standard to the guys they might release. Boss might be in a unique position in terms of his unavailability, maybe. I don't know.
Well, we'll see. I'd love to have Boss back for this. He's a model for this fixture. Just perfect. I'd be happy enough going with Cooney and McGrath on the bench. I mean, they're two good players. They should have enough for the team that Treviso are going to put out.
Yeah, that's
famous
the thing.
Last words.
Well, Treviso, they've a very good. They've only been beaten once in the last 12 months at home, and they beat us in 2010. So
they sure did.
They are a pretty formidable outfit at home, but they are, as you did say, they are going to be showing quite a few.
They're the only people who've beaten Munster this season, are they?
I think so. Yeah.
Certainly.
And any team who goes over to Italy and doesn't take Treviso seriously is, kind of deserves what they get, because how many times have we said it, Treviso at home? I mean, we've been saying it for 3 years that they've been waiting in the long grass, and they've got plenty of scalps. So, I don't know. I just think that, we should have a strong enough team available to us, even without our internationals, to do some.
Where I'd be worried is 12. We're missing about the 4 best people that can play 12.
Yeah, and it's been said Goodman's out now.
Goodman is out. Darcy is obviously with Ireland. You could have had McFadden in there, but he's gone. You could have had Fitzgerald in there, but he's gone. So that's 4 guys that could play at 12. So it's going to be Noel Reid, I'd say. Who
the other side of that is Collie O'Shea's back in training. Was back in training this week. So
be a week too soon, I'd say.
Might be a week too soon for. I mean, he is an option there.
And Coughlin is back.
And Coughlin is back as well. So it's hard to know. I'd say they'll go with Noel Reid. I mean, he's been picked there in less injury struck, absence struck teams.
Yeah.
So
I'd be happy enough to go.
Yeah, I don't have any.
And Mackin beside him.
Well, there's rumours that Lottie might be staying with us for a little bit longer, especially with Goodman's injury.
Well, Goodman and McFadden have been injured.
Yeah. We're supposed to be signing an NIQ hooker to fill in for Straussy. So I don't know how that leaves us with keeping Lottie, but they're supposed to be trying to do it anyway. Whether we'll get permission from the IRFU is
that's
another
the hard thing. It's hard to know now. I mean, whilst I didn't like the NSSSD, at least you knew where you stood with it.
What?
The National Squad Succession Strategy document. At least you knew where you stood with it. You had these hard and fast rules, and that was one of the problems people had, that they were hard and fast. But at least you knew what the position was. Now
it's the Irish way, Dave.
Now it's
go on.
It's the squads have been filled on the Fianna Fáil tip of the cap and a wink.
That leads me on to the IRFU actually, which this week they announced officially that they are going to go for the World Cup in 2023.
Yeah, baby.
And that Leo Varadkar is going to bring it to brought to the cabinet on Tuesday. which is all very positive, you know. I mean, it's
Well,
going to bring a lot of money into the
We have
economy.
an excellent chance of getting it over the other countries that are there. So that probably means
No
It's
hope.
not gonna happen.
No, well, there's a lot of good things around. I mean, the GA had a vote, was it last year,
Yeah,
and
they
voted
respected.
92% in
Yeah.
favour, which even on approving the spelling of GAA is wouldn't get a 92%
Come and look
in
last
favour.
Gael,
Yeah,
you
well,
see.
that's it. You see.
Well, you see, somebody came along and did them the wink and the nod. And
Well,
said,
that's probably it.
"Oh,
Yeah.
no, there's a few broken roads now down your
But,
way. And I think we might have to."
Yeah, so that's that. I mean, that's
Refurbishing of
Build.
stadiums, you mean?
yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, although I don't think a lot of stadiums will need refurbishment for this. I think more of the work will need to be done on floodlighting, but that's
Corporate.
and well, GA has some fairly good corporate entertainment
A lot
facilities
of-
in their bigger stadia.
A lot of the stadiums have a lot of standing now. Don't know
Yeah,
how
well, that's
that-
not a problem. That's not a problem for
not
rugby.
necessarily a problem, but it's the amount of standing.
Well,
they
I
have
think there
to-
should be more standing in rugby, so I did. But anyway, so you've got
True terrace man.
yeah. Well, we've had the GA is in favour of it. Obviously, the RFU is in favour of it. The Irish government. It'll go to the Northern Ireland
Everyone's in favour
Executive
of it.
next.
Show me an Irish person that's not in favour of it.
I can't see the Northern Ireland Executive being anything less than fulsome in its approval. So it's just a matter of getting into the big problem is that the two governments are going to have to underwrite the tournament company.
And here's that interview now that we promised you with Manus Lappin.
I'd like to welcome Manus Lappin to Blues Talk. Manus is the editor of Emerald Rugby Magazine, Ireland's leading rugby magazine.
It's my pleasure, Dave. It's always good to chat.
Manus has the honour of being the first ever interviewee on Blues Talk.
Brilliant. I better make it a good one then.
It took us 2 years to finally find someone who would talk to us. Well, we'll get straight into it. Obviously, the big story at the moment is the autumn internationals. After the first match against Samoa, Joe was being regarded as the second coming. After the game against Australia, it turns out he's not the Messiah. He's just a naughty boy.
He's just an ordinary Joe, eh?
Yeah, just an ordinary Joe. Well, how do you see those last two games? And indeed the New Zealand game. Should we be disappointed about the results? Should we be looking for results, or should we see the whole thing as just a process?
I mean, it's a real good debate, Dave, because you need to give Joe time. He has a fundamental rebuild to do. I mean, he inherited an aging squad, and the man has to be given time to do that. At the same time, you know, the Australia result was very, very hard to stomach for a number of reasons. Not only did we look very laboured in our attack and very predictable, but our defence was nowhere near where it has been. And I suppose that's the worrying thing for yourself and for myself and for supporters is that, you know, we've seen how Ireland can play against Samoa. Okay, we got away with a little bit of possibly poor decision making against Samoa because they just didn't have the same number of strike runners to come back at us. But when you look at the ball being kicked, you know, to Australia's key strike runners every time and they return it with interest, you know, you kind of... I actually asked Joe after the game, I says, you know, at what stage do you think about getting a message on the field? And he said, well, I actually spoke to the boys at half time and basically told them not to be kicking the ball away, you know. And I know from a forward's point of view, there's nothing more demoralising than getting up, having worked hard to win a ruck, looking up, see the ball being kicked back, and to see one of their wingers or fullbacks sprinting past you. I mean, it's demoralising for the team, and it's probably not a wise tactic against a team like Australia. But I suppose, I mean, on the wider context of things, Joe really has a total rebuild to do, and he has less than 2 years to do it. I mean, the natural cycle of a rugby union is between World Cups, and in honesty, Ireland should have replaced the coach, given him time to rebuild, given him 4 years running the World Cup. But look, we'll have what we have, and I suppose in terms of who is going to be able to do it, I mean, you know, if Joe's as good a man as is out there, and I certainly hope everybody gets behind him, he has to be given a little bit of leeway. And certainly against New Zealand, you know, the boys for themselves will want to put in a good performance. But as I say, you know, he has to be given. I mean, the Leinster boys know what he's talking about. They know his game plan. They understand him. Obviously, having played under him for a number of years. The Ulster boys and Munster boys have to try and catch up, and the physios and the doctors and everybody else, the whole backroom team have to try and catch up with where he wants to be and where he wants to see the team play. And I think Paul O'Connell alluded to it after the game when he kind of mentioned that, and he said, you know, they were almost too overcome with technical knowledge that they forgot how to play and they lost their intensity. And I mean, that can happen. We've seen that happen a number of times in different provinces over the years. But I certainly think Joe has his finger on the pulse. He's a very shrewd man. He understands the players, and he's taken his time to make himself available to the players, to understand where they're coming from, to speak with the provinces. And I certainly think, he's a big ask ahead of the World Cup, but at the same time, I wouldn't be too disheartened about results at this stage in his tenure. I mean, he'll be looking at a decent Six Nations. You think about it, Dave. He wants not this Six Nations, but the following Six Nations to be his trial run for the World Cup. And I mean, there's a lot of work to be done in between that, and I think we need to give him a little bit of latitude to do that.
Well, one heartening thing is the number of young players who've been capped over the last couple of games. Jack McGrath's been capped, Henshaw's been capped, Devin Tonger's picked up a couple of caps. There seems to be younger players around the place that weren't necessarily there before. There has, however, been some disappointment that the likes of Kieran Marmion and JJ Hanrahan haven't been called up. But one could argue that that's mainly because they play in positions of depth.
I honestly, I think, I definitely think so, and I know that Marmion in particular, I know Wales have been knocking on his door as well, so he could go either way, but I think it probably his heart is in Ireland, and he does want to play in Ireland. He's possibly just a little bit inexperienced for test level. It would have been good to have him in around the camp, in around the training camp, to get used to systems, to get used to what goes on at that level, and just to experience the intensity at test level. But as you say, I mean, we have a wealth of depth in that particular position, particularly at 9. I mean, when you look at Owen Redden, you look at Conor Murray, and you look at Isaac Boss, who with 3 totally different types of scrum half, depending on the nature of what the game needs to be played. And I thought it was particularly interesting when we're looking at Luke Marshall, talk about young guys coming through, and week in, week out up here, we watch him breaking gain lines, running superb lines, and I thought he was quite tailored or quite quiet in the first half against Australia, and he really sort of came into himself whenever Ian Madigan come on. And my take on it is that he's probably been told, you've got Johnny Sexton on one side, you've got Brian Driscoll on the other, take the ball from Johnny and give it to Brian, and that is the danger of these guys. You don't want to overwhelm them, but sometimes when you just cut them loose, they produce the goods. And I know certainly whenever Madigan come on, I've certainly felt that Luke stepped up. He stepped up his responsibility. He took on a little bit more responsibility, and he took it on himself to try and break the gain line and create spaces and create events. So, I mean, it was good in that respect, and it's good to see young players like that coming on. And I also think, Dave, it's also worth mentioning Ian Madigan. I mean, that guy wouldn't have had a look in training. He would have been holding tackle bags. He would have been trying to keep himself fit and keep himself strong, keep himself interested. It would have been all about Johnny in the week leading into it. So for him to come in after 40 minutes, totally cold, and kind of govern the game the way he did, I thought it was an immense performance for him. Now, people will kind of compare him to the like of Johnny Sexton, but when you think Johnny Sexton's 30, 31 more caps, that's a proverbial lifetime in terms of Test rugby. And for Madigan to come in, I think he really showed true class and true quality. The way he was able to come in, control the game. Now, the one small kind of the trade-off as we have between experience and youthful exuberance is, I mean, Quade Cooper went between Madigan and Marshall for that try, and that was just a simple mix-up in communication, and it can happen at any level. I don't think it's worth hanging either of the boys out to dry for that. I think both of them put in really good performances, and as you said, we've got these young guys coming through, the Robbie Henshaws, and they don't look out of place. I mean, you'll remember the times when you've seen a guy making his Test debut, and he comes off after 35 minutes looking like he's a lost lamb. You compare that to Jack McGrath against Samoa, and he puts in a man of the match performance, and a well-deserved man of the match. And trust me, I sit around these journalists all the time, and they don't give it to forward very easily. He put in a superb performance, and this is really what you need. But sometimes I say it's difficult to balance the bringing them in, getting them to play the game plan, and letting them play their natural game that they do week in, week out. And I suppose that's where Joe's a good man. He can pick these guys up, and he understands their game, and just be generally easing them in.
Previously, halfbacks were Ron O'Gara and Peter Stringer, and while they usually played well, if they didn't, well, there was no choice. There was no depth behind them. Now we have a situation where Johnny Sexton has been pushed by Paddy Jackson. He himself has been pushed by Ian Madigan. And the great thing about those two is that whilst they both can do the basics well, they're very,
Absolutely.
very different out halves in terms of the extras they bring.
I think as well, I mean, looking at both guys are very, very young. And you take on a lot of responsibility. Not only is the intensity so much higher at Test level than it is even at Heineken Cup level, but you have so many more decisions to make, so many quick decisions to make, and that's probably the aspect of an out halves game. I mean, going through the rudimentary parts of the game are relatively, it's bread and butter stuff for them, but it's making those decisions under pressure in that environment, and it's making good decisions. Now, we've seen Johnny Sexton make some bad decisions, we've seen Paddy Jackson make some bad decisions, we've seen Ian Madigan make some bad decisions, but for me the key quality is the good decisions far outweigh those, but you have to give these guys time to learn how to make those. There's no substitute for playing test rugby. You can train morning, noon and night. There is no substitute, and it's a difficult one because, as you say, the coach is always under pressure to win. Coach is under pressure to deliver. Nobody goes out ever looking to lose a rugby match. I mean, I've played the dizzy heights of Junior 4, and I've never went out and played a game of rugby looking to lose it or wanting to lose it. So I think you've got to kind of we've got to be a little bit mindful of where these guys are coming from, and probably give them a little bit of, I mean, you don't let them off the hook altogether, but we have to give them a little bit of time to bed in. Ronan O'Gara, when he first started out, he was debatable whether or not he was going to make it as an out half. And Johnny Sexton, in the early days, when he was coming in and he made a lot of wrong decisions and execution wasn't great. But look, you give these boys time and look what they can deliver. And if we get out of Johnny Sexton what we got out of Ronan O'Gara, over a decade's worth of top quality service.
Oh, yeah.
And if you've got Madigan and Jackson coming through pushing that, well, that's all you want. You want that sheer depth, and that's where the great teams do have that depth.
Well, speaking of great teams, for the last 100 years of our sport, there's been no greater team than the All Blacks. Is there anything we can do to stop them? Elephant tranquilizers, baseball bats. What was it Terry Kingston said in '95 about trying to stop Joe Malone using telegraph poles?
That's right. They get into the Castleknock Golf Club and start poisoning their food slowly now, as some have tried in the past. But look, I think all our boys can do is go out and try and put their game plan. And we've seen actually down in New Zealand in the second test that if we actually impose our game plan and if we slow down their ball, they do get rattled. And in terms of victory, I would see a victory far away, in fairness. And I think, you have the optimist, you have the pessimist, and you have the realist in the room here at the minute. And I certainly would say it would be a difficult one to see New Zealand losing it. But if our guys go in, they can put together their proper phases of attack. I mean, against Australia, we looked out of ideas after second, third phase. And, the real good teams have fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh phases all planned, and they know where they're going to be when they're in a particular part of the field. They know what play to enact. And that'll take time for us to work on. But certainly against New Zealand, we want to put in a good dogged, good solid performance. Supporters want to see people win. And basically the IRFU want bums on seats because that's what funds the game. I mean, people going to the Viva Stadium is what funds the game. So, I mean, we need people to support them. We also need to be mindful of where we're coming from with the new coaching team in place, with a relatively large number of young guys getting their first taste of test experience. And certainly, if we can put in a good dogged performance, as any of our teams, provincial-wise, are capable of doing on any given day, I mean, that's what we can do. We can frustrate New Zealand, we can slow down their ball, we can hit them, we can knock them back, and we can try and play with the same level of intensity that they're going to come at us with. And if you do that, you'll be there or thereabouts. But I suppose now what you're really looking for is a decent performance, a decent attacking performance, a decent defensive performance. Couple of key decisions, go in the right way, and let's ditch this aimless kicking the ball back to their strike runners, because that just does not work at this level.
Well, that's the Autumn Internationals done and dusted. We're actually in the middle of the Pro 12 season, and this weekend is actually a Pro 12 match weekend. Ulster, Munster, Leinster had a few key hiccups on the way, but they're all going quite well. One thing we've discussed on Blues Talk is Ulster, and seeing as you're a man of
Can
Ulster...
you tell by my accent? I once got accused of being a Leinster bigot, by the way.
Oh, gosh.
Online.
It's obvious there's no accent on Twitter. What was I going to say? Yeah. Well, one question about Ulster, and this is a discussion we've had with people, and I believe this is Ulster's year. They've had a little bit of adversity in the past. It was the 2012 Heineken Cup final, which I actually think came a year too soon for that team. There was a Pro 12 final last year. But this is the year that the team that Brian McLaughlin started, that Mark Anscombe has carried on. I think it comes to maturity this year. A lot of good players, great mix of youth and experience.
Yeah.
Am I reading too much into Ulster?
No, I think you're spot on, Dave. I think certainly if you're talking to any of the boys, and what they certainly would reiterate to me is they agree 100%. They've been there. They've taken the losers' medals. They've taken the runners-up medals. They've taken the hard knocks. They've learned the hard way. They always talk. I mean, talking to Johan Muller there last week, and he'll tell you that it took. Okay, Leinster done it differently. They won the Heineken Cup in the first time getting to the final. But look, along the way, it took knocks. You look at any of the other teams, they've taken setbacks along the way, and certainly Ulster have. I mean, it's difficult for a coach coming in because Mark Anscombe came in carrying on, as you said, Brian McLaughlin's reign, and he had last year to kind of get his feet under the table, to get a bit of a footprint going, to get the boys playing off his kind of hymn sheet, so to speak. And this year now they're starting to kick on. Now, they didn't start great for the season, but I mean, the start of the season isn't always the end of the season. You know, they've built steadily. You know, they're leading their pool. They're top of their pool in the Heineken Cup. They're sitting fifth in the Rabo Pro 12, and you know they're pushing on. There's a bit of confidence. The thing that probably has hurt them a little bit is they've had a few injuries, particularly to the second row, and that's kind of hampered them a little bit. But look, that's what you do. You build a squad. Young guys come in, they get experience, they up their game, they get their opportunity, and they take the opportunity, and that's really what Anscombe's created. I think your summation is spot on. They will be bitterly disappointed if they don't collect silverware at the end of the season, whether it be Heineken Cup, which is what they're aiming for, or whether it be Rabotrack Pro 12, which is also what they're aiming for. They feel they've been the bridesmaids on a number of occasions, and now it's time to put up or shut up. And I suppose that's not putting too fine a point on it. Now, every year, everyone gets better, teams get better, players get smarter. That's just how it develops, and people will be out there to stop them. But certainly the feeling in around the camp is this is their year. I mean, you're 100% right as well with the Heineken Cup final. It was a year too soon for them. Got carried through on it and got taught a good lesson by Leinster. But having said that, I mean, they will have learned from that, and it's not just paying lip service to it. Because I know there was nobody hurting more than those players after that game. Absolutely nobody, no supporter, no parent, no spouse. Nobody was hurting worse than those players, and they remember that hurt. And I certainly think this is a season where they will be, if they do not win silver of some sort this year, they will be bitterly disappointed.
I remember talking to Michael Cheika after he left Leinster, as it happens, and he was saying you can't really have success unless you've got that bit of adversity to build on. Now, Ulster have had that adversity both on and sadly off the pitch. Yeah. But the great thing is that Ulster are beginning to build some significant depth. I mean, 2 years ago, Ulster had a great first 15, but after that, it was all a bit shallow. Now, you look at it, and Paddy Wallace hasn't played this season. Stephen Ferris is injured. Craig Gilroy has been out. Stuart Olin gets injured. But, there's Luke Marshall is there, Paul Marshall at scrum half. Michael Allen has been a revelation this season.
I mean, they've got these young guys coming through, and they're well schooled in the academies, and they do get a lot of game time at their local clubs as well. I mean, that is critical. The thing, I remember being down in Thomond Park last year at the end of the last year's Heineken Cup when Ulster had played Munster, and they beat them in Thomond Park. And I remember being in the press area and going down to the press conference, and guys were saying to me, "Where'd this guy Gilroy come from? Where just grow him? Look, that guy's been putting in performances week in, week out for his local club, for the Ravens, and for Ulster." And it's just whenever kind of these guys apparently burst onto the stage where you go, "Wow, where have they come from?" But they don't burst onto the stage. It's training week in, week out, kicking on your own, passing the ball up a wall on your own. These are the things that develop these as players. And I certainly think that in terms of pushing on from their past failures or that they really need this season, and it needs to go well for them. And I certainly think you're right in what you say, in that the depth have developed. Now you can have the depth, but it's getting the experience. And sometimes you find when you take a lot of young players into a camp or into that test level or that next level of development, is their physical condition then becomes an issue. Now I know Stuart Oldings was a freakish. He just kind of turned and it twisted his knee and hobbled off and turned out to be an ACL. Craig Craig Gilroy is another guy. He's looking really, really sharp and starting to get back into training. You have a lot of guys in there who are pushing hard, and while the internationals are away this weekend in particular, these boys will want to push on and make a mark. And I think there's one thing Mark Anscombe has said from the outset is, I will never pick a team on reputation. And I think he's kind of shown that on a number of occasions. If a guy comes in, the guy plays well, he will continue to play, and it's up to somebody else to take the jersey off him. And, whereas we can kind of all say that and coaches can pay lip service to it, it's actually carried through on that commitment actually is where you start to then develop the real depth in the squad. And I think that's one of the things that certainly Michael Cheika was very successful doing at Leinster, and certainly Joe Schmidt continued on, and Rob Penny is starting to build that in Munster as well. So look, that's all we want. I mean, Irish rugby is a pyramid, and we want it all to feed into at the top level. But at the same time, for it to be successful at that top level, you need success in the provinces. And I certainly think this year could be a really, really successful year for Ulster. I know a lot of people will be very disappointed if it's not.
Well, I hope that Ulster have a relatively successful year. Not too much, though.
Fair enough. Ever the diplomat, Dave.
Let's talk about Emerald Rugby now. Anyone who knows what a great magazine it is. It certainly is a fantastic read. There's great in-depth interviews, great articles. How did Emerald Rugby come about? I mean, what on earth possessed you to open a rugby magazine in this country?
Well, my background was in IT. I was a business IT consultant, and had spent many years travelling around, and I wanted to kind of do my own thing, and rugby was always my passion. And I kind of had been sitting at airports, could never find a really, really good Irish rugby magazine that kind of got me a little bit closer to the stars that I followed, the people that I like to watch at the weekends. And my wife was in publishing, Emma, and her background is in publishing. She's 15, 20 years in publishing. So rather than me start up an IT company, we decided to start up a publishing company. I'll tell you a good one, Dave, actually. There was a guy, Bobby Dominguez, and he started a website back in the late 90s called Matchmaker.com. And he asked me to come in as a partner on it at one stage. The guy from Florida, I was doing some work over there. And I was like, no, this is a Starbucks story, Bobby sold the company 4 or 5 years later for 45 million or something like that, So I had to do something. So we kind of decided we'd put together Emerald Rugby and kind of put a different slant on things as to what was presently available on the market. And, we just try and bring a little bit for everyone. It really, actually, I joked earlier on about being called a Leinster bigot, but that kind of brings a smile to me because it shows that I'm not being biased, and I do try my best to be impartial. Okay, you can tell by my accent, I'm Ulster born and bred, and but I do have an impartial eye that I do like to kind of take that view. Some people have accused me of being Ulster's worst critic, so I mean that's what happens. But that's how we started the company 10 years ago. And the first issue, we were kind of, it's like if you start a new business and you're not too sure, and everybody tells you it's great and everybody tells you all the good stuff, but nobody tells you any of the bad stuff. And for me, it's kind of the bad stuff that I wanted to hear, and I wasn't hearing any. So our first issue sold out within 2 weeks, and we had to do an extra print run. So that kind of confirmed us that there was an appetite in the market for that kind of magazine. But I say, like, the publishing is something that has changed considerably over the last 10 years. Whenever we started, with my background in IT, we had a website right from the start, but that was novel in the Irish publishing industry. Very few magazines had websites, and we've seen quite a development of the from the traditional print media into the online, and then certainly into the digital media space as well, which just kind of suits me because that's where my real skill set lies in terms of technology. But I mean, that's how it started off, and we're a small company. We're husband and wife team, and brother-in-law does some of the designing on the adverts, and a close family friend designs the magazine. So I mean, people would say, we've googled your premises and you're in a residential area. Yeah, well, we work from an office built at the side of our home, and it makes absolute sense for us to do that. Not that I spend a lot of time here, unfortunately. I'm on the road most of the time, but that's it. If you keep your overheads low, and you don't get above your station. And I say, we're a small company, and it's nice when people think that you're a large conglomerate like IPC Media or some of the large media companies. So I mean, that's how it all started, and that's what's put bread on the table for the last 10 years.
Well, in a way, you picked the best time to start because the popularity of the game has just exploded over the last decade. I mean, 10 years ago, people barely knew there was a 5 or 6 nations game on, and now everyone knows when there's a Pro 12 game on. On the other side of that, in terms of running a print publishing venture, the whole world has changed with online content, electronic content. Now, your background in IT certainly helps with that, but how do you find competing against that in terms of the strictures that you have to operate under in terms of, verifying stories? And you can't just throw a story up on the website. I mean, whereas, a blogger can. Now, there are some very good bloggers out there, Harping on Rugby, Whiffle Cordy, Demented Mo, Blues Talk, but there are others that don't have that, shall we say, journalistic rigour. I mean, you see or you hear a story and pretty much it's true, but you can't really run with it until you have it verified and the facts checked or confirmed, etc. I mean, you must find that's in a way frustrating.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you turn around and you hear these stories being broke, but probably 8 out of 10 of them are incorrect. And as you say, like we're a professional publishing company. We have insurance. We have a lot of insurance we pay. We're under strict codes of conduct. We're under strict regulations in terms of what we can and can't report, and certainly how we can or cannot report it. But to me, that kind of adds to your credibility because people know it's a trusted source. And there's one thing: Emerald Rugby wouldn't have survived 10 years if it hadn't been a trusted source of information. And the thing about rugby supporters and people who buy the magazine is they're extremely knowledgeable about the sport. I consider myself a fan who is fortunate enough to be able to spend 4 hours analysing a game of rugby just so I can learn a little bit more. And I'm very fortunate that I get to speak to high-profile professional players so that I can learn from chatting to them and from chatting to coaches. I mean, in terms of people just throwing stuff out there, and it happens all the time, and you just need to be very careful about who you trust. I mean, you wouldn't trust somebody who asked you for your car keys just because they asked you nicely. So why would you trust somebody with your knowledge or your skills? And that one thing I have about bloggers, and I mean, you mentioned Harping on Rugby there, and I do know Jeff, but I generally don't pay much attention to people who blog under a nickname or a pseudonym. The way I look at it is quite simply, if you're happy enough to put your stuff out there, you're happy enough to take the criticism face to face if it comes to you. And that's kind of how I've always kind of operated things. Don't get everything right. We try our best. We try, as you say, to verify every single story. The difficulty, particularly in rugby, is a lot of the breaking stories are about contract negotiations and about this player signing for this club or a player arriving here. Very often those things break down at the very last second, as in the guy's in a car on his way to sign a contract with somebody else, and the president rings him and says, "We'll give you what you're asking," and he turns around and he goes, and that's very much the nature of it. So I kind of leave that kind of sort of breaking stuff to others, and when we have it verified and when we have it validated, we'll put it up. And the other thing is, you've got to trust your own journalists. We have a real good team of journalists, some ex-international players, some just really good journalists who've been with us for a long time, and we kind of trust their judgment, and they know how the whole thing works. It's difficult if you're, it's not. I don't see it as a competition. I mean, we can all sit and chat in a bar and talk about the rumours of what's going on, and possibly some of those rumours will come true. But when you're kind of looking at a published magazine or a content produced by a bona fide publishing company, you kind of know that you're getting the correct views, you're getting the correct line on it. So I mean, it's good. I love it. I mean, I would be on Twitter lots, as you know yourself, and I try and contribute as much during games. And sometimes I have arguments with people on Twitter, and sometimes they put me in my place. But to me, that it's all open. It's all open and it's easily accessible, and I try to make myself as accessible as possible, and I think certainly the majority of people will respect that. Now, you do get some people who will try and abuse it, but when you have as much grey hair as I have, you kind of water off a duck's back type of thing, Oh,
I know that feeling, certainly, about the grey hair. The other side of that is, as you say, you're a well-known tweeter. Emerald Rugby has its Facebook page, has its website, and you also do a digital edition. Now, the mobile internet device of choice these days is the tablet, so that's another market you're catering for.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's been very good for us because we would have had a lot of expats would subscribe to us. Now, you know yourself, the postal system isn't always that great, and guys want to read the articles. They want to read the stuff as soon as they can, and when you're hamstrung by a post, it does become a bit of an issue. We've been very fortunate that we've been able to convert a lot of those postal subscribers, particularly overseas postal subscribers, into online subscribers, and they can go onto the website and take out an online subscription, and where they have access to over 5 years worth of archives that they can download free of charge, or with our iPad app where you can buy issues as well. So it's something that we've kind of tried to embrace and tried to stay ahead of. We were actually the first Irish magazine, to have an iPad app, and we were also the first magazine in Ireland and the UK to use QR codes to kind of link adverts and articles to online content. So it's one of those things we've tried to stay ahead of the curve. As I say, we're a very, very small company, a small family-run business, and obviously we're limited in time and resources as to what we can do. But as I say, from what we have, we'll try and make the most of it. And certainly the online, I mean, if I didn't have a hefty print bill every month, I'd be really, really happy. If everybody would just buy it online, I'd be immensely happy man.
It's the old squeeze the bread factor with magazines. People like the feel of it. Listen, Manus, I will let you go, but before you do, give us a quick prediction for the match on Sunday.
For Sunday, yeah. I think if Ireland finish within 15 points of New Zealand, it'll be a decent result, as long as New Zealand don't only score 15 points. But, I would be more inclined to look towards, and I know this is it may sound as sitting on the fence, but I say if Ireland can put in a good show, they can front up in attack, front up in defence, challenge at the break turn and put in a good set piece, I'll be more than happy with that, irrespective of what the final outcome of the score is.
Manus Lappin from Emerald Rugby, thank you very much for joining us.
Dave, it's my pleasure. Thanks a million.
Well, thanks very much, lads, for another enlightening debate. Thanks a million for watching. Cheers.